Okay, so the thing to keep in mind is Cowpeats was originally built as a cradle-to-grave violation tracking system. So the biggest overall goal for the new program was to identify where violations come from and to document them in a fashion that makes it easier to make sure they stand up on appeal or on any kind of challenge. But then once those violations have been identified, to record the results of your activities that go into determining what, if any, enforcement responses should be taken for those violations. So we have the inspection module, top left, that's the part that you've been using, and that's a great way to identify violations out in the field if you happen to have an inspector out there at the time the violation occurs. The other method originally of identifying violations were inspections. That's the top right part of the screen. So an investigation can occur as the result of an inspection. It can occur just because one of you happens to be driving by something and you see something happening. It also now can occur through a complaint app. There's a phone app called CalPEATS that DPR developed with us, and there's a section I'll discuss where you may get a pesticide incident report that comes in, and you may want to investigate that incident. So that helps provide some documentation from a member of the public, a field worker, part of the crew, someone out in the field that's actually submitting the pesticide incident. And then there's another way that investigations can occur, which is Work Health and Safety Department of DPR can receive a doctor's first report or receive a direct notification that an incident occurred. And you may receive a request from WHS saying, hey, we identified this incident in your county. So all of those things can spark an investigation, and an investigation may identify violations much the same way that an inspection identifies violations. There is now, since we built this slide, there are two other ways to create or let CalPEATS know that violations have occurred that you want to pursue. One of them is called the quick violation notice. So way back in the day when county inspectors were out in the field with clipboards and 3-ring binders, one of the forms that you had with you was a 101 form, a violation notice form. And you didn't really need to be doing an inspection or anything else. You could just write a violation notice in the field. And when we first built CalPEATS, we resisted that because we wanted some more documentation of a violation than just the notice of violation. But the old wore us down. And so now there's two ways to issue a violation notice in CalPEATS without going through the investigation process. One is, as I said, called the quick violation notice, or QVN. And that is really a shortcut to writing a very short investigation. So we'll take a look at QVNs. But really they're kind of being superseded these days by a new feature which is called instant violation notice, because quick violation notices weren't quick enough. So we actually added the PRENF 101 violation notice form as a standalone document to the CalPEATS mobile app. So you may well see violations coming into the investigation/enforcement portion of CalPEATS through these instant violation notice documents. For the most part, once an instant violation notice is written, it doesn't require any additional action, but in some cases what starts out as an instant violation notice may turn into a bigger issue. So you'll want to be aware of how you can see those, query them, and if necessary, potentially turn them into a bigger investigation. Okay, and then the bottom part of the screen is what happens to violations. So the idea of cradle-to-grave tracking is once a violation is identified in the system, we want to know how it was disposed of. And that's the term we use in the system, is disposal of a violation. And I'll pull it up in a second. I'm going to go find it on the web. But DPR has a chart that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. That is their enforcement response actions chart that tells you for different violations, well, for violations in general, the steps you can go through to dispose of that violation. So it covers compliance actions, the different types of compliance actions. Then it covers enforcement response actions, which are more colloquially known as NOPAs. And then referral actions, where you refer the case for criminal prosecution. Now, we also introduced another way to dispose of violations. There's always been this, on that chart, there's always been this little entry that says violation noted on inspection form. So on the old inspection forms, you could check at the bottom, notice of violation or cease and desist, and that sort of constituted an enforcement response to that violation. And implicit in checking that box was the inspector's judgment that it was a Class C violation, it was minor, there's no prior violation history, and no additional action was going to be taken. So it was just a violation notice, which is one of the compliance actions on the chart, but it was a shortcut to it. But there have always been other ways that violations would disappear. The most common one is we noted the violation, but when we went to do an enforcement on it, we didn't have enough evidence to actually prove that the violation occurred, so we just dropped it. And then another very common one is you might have 5 violations on an inspection and you enforce on 3 of them and the other 2 you just let go. So we have the ability to dispose of or record the fact that you disposed of those violations in that manner. But ultimately, the goal and where we're at right now for the most part is you can take any violation that was ever noted in the system and run a report that tells you how that violation was disposed. Now, of course, there's been tens of thousands of violations in the system where I haven't actually done a count, maybe hundreds of thousands now. And so you're not going to be looking at individual violations, but there's a neat report that tells you by code section how different things were disposed of over time and things like that. So we'll take a look at some of the reporting. So that's the overall layout of the other half of Cowpeats that we're going to be covering today. I'm going to skip over the workflows and treating user IDs. So right now we'll jump right into the Cowpeats system itself. Before I start showing you how it works, any questions, any particular areas that you have questions about?
I was just wondering when you say the violations disappear, just mean disappear from the system, or they just not being...
It means that they are marked as having been disposed in the system, so we know that no further action is required.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So, I'm going to log into the test system. When we first set up CalPEATS, we set up test accounts for everyone. If you don't have a test account or you don't know where the test system is, just let me know during the meeting today. It's fairly easy. It's calpeatstest.calicosol.com is the web address. And
Sorry, what was that address?
CalPEATstest.calicosol, CALICOSOL.com.
And our normal username and password works, or we have to get a special one?
If you forgot your password, you can click on Login Help and try and reset it, or if you can't...
No, well, my username and password that works for my normal CalPEATS account works for
Oh,
this one?
no.
Okay.
No, we set up test accounts, like I say, back in
We don't
2016.
have
And
that information, so it's gone. I'll
Okay.
forget that.
well, let's have a quick look and see who's in here. There's probably a whole different crew of people, too.
Probably.
Yeah, very few individual accounts. So we'll go set up accounts for everyone. If you just shoot me a list, Kara, of email addresses, I'll set them up and send back. I'll set them up with a generic password, and then when you log in, it'll ask you to change your password.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so on the anatomy of CalPEATS, the top part of the dashboard is the inspection. So I'm not going to talk anymore about inspections. So the next parts we'll see, and let me just talk through the different parts that are on the dashboard, and then we'll go back and kind of take a walk through how each of them works. We have investigations. That's fairly self-evident. Those quick violation notices that I mentioned. That's where you can issue a violation notice and it creates an inspection record like an investigation record like you did a investigation, and fills out the rest of the forms for you. Worker health and safety investigation requests. So when WHS gets a report from the hospital or a report from an individual, they will enter it into their system and then they'll request an investigation from your county and it will appear in here. So you'll need some way to determine, based on the basics of what the incident is, who's going to actually take that and do an investigation for it. When Work Health and Safety issues you an investigation request, it is kind of mandatory. So we'll talk a lot more about that. Now, violations, these are not records that have been entered directly. A violation that is noted. So remember the places I told you violations can be noted. They can be noted on inspections, investigations, quick violation notices, instant violation notices. So all the violations that are noted on those records will show up here until they are added to an enforcement response. Okay? And just a quick side note here, this is the dashboard. The dashboard is to show you work that you need to do. So this isn't a list of all the violations. This is just the violations that somebody needs to do something about. And so they'll remain on here until it's pulled into an enforcement response. Once a violation is listed in an enforcement response, then the dashboard item becomes the enforcement response. You've got to clear out the enforcement response rather than having to worry about those individual violations. So that's the next part of the dashboard, is what enforcement responses are open. And then part of the enforcement response process frequently is submitting a decision report to DPR for approval. And because that's kind of a important and time-sensitive process, we included open decision reports. And when I say open, those are ones that you are working on that you haven't submitted to DPR. There are also ones that you submitted to DPR and you don't have a response on yet, because they have a deadline too to give you a yes or no on those. Okay, so that's really all the work items on your dashboard that can be related to the investigation and enforcement response modules. And now I'll back up and I'll start talking about each one of them individually. Another quick side note on the dashboard. My investigations and all investigations in the inspection world, my inspections are inspections that you've done and inspections that were done by people that report to you that you are supposed to review and approve. So if you recall, the workflow for an inspection is it's in progress until someone in the field signs it, and then it goes into draft. And then the inspector finishes the report and submits it for review. It goes in review, and then it goes to closed. We don't have those statuses for all of the enforcement response work. The idea being during the initial design of CalPEATS that people who are doing enforcement response work don't always and may never have a supervisor that they submit things to. So most of the people that do enforcement response work have the ability to close their own records. So that's why the workflows are shorter in the enforcement response and investigation world than they are in the inspection world, just because of the perceived level of experience of an enforcement officer versus an inspector. Okay, so what that means is my investigations, those are just investigations that I'm working on. And then you have some other filters. You can look at all investigations that you're working on or just worker health and safety ones, and then you can also limit your time frame. But I'm going to go ahead and start a new investigation. So new investigations can happen, as I said, for a number of reasons. There might be an inspection that happens, and very commonly this would be like a field worker inspection. And the field workers say, yeah, the field was treated, but it was weeks ago. And so you're going to go back to headquarters and do a headquarters inspection. And that constitutes an investigation. 2 linked inspections constitutes an investigation. It may be someone just noted something during an inspection and you want to do an investigation. It might come from work health and safety, or it might come from a pesticide incident report from the public. Either way, there's a couple of different ways to open investigations. Just 2 ways, 3 ways, 4 ways to open investigations. I'm going to start with the top of the screen, right? So if I go into a inspection and let's pop open an inspection here, and I'm going to add a non-compliant. Actually, I need a firm person inspected too. So let me just fill out some information on this inspection. I'm going to have a non-compliance. And I'm going to identify at least one possible responsible party. So when I go to close an inspection, I'll say this is closed. I'm going to ignore the alerts, and I'll save that. I will get a new investigation button. So when you are reviewing an inspection that one of your inspectors has completed, if you see something on the inspection that warrants further investigation, the quickest way you can start the investigation record is by clicking New Investigation here. And that will give you a form where you can fill out some information about the investigation, but most importantly, you can pull in information from the inspection. Now, I'm going to talk about the bottom part of this form. I'll revisit the top part of the form in a second. But you'll see here I can already identify, we know we inspected American Farms, and so I can pull in American Farms into the investigation as a potentially responsible party, or as a claimant if they were, the ones saying they were damaged by an inappropriate spray by the JPC, for example. Okay, and if there was more information on this inspection, like products and other things, I'd have more options down here to bring into the investigation. That's sort of the first, in order of the screen, top to bottom, way to start an investigation is right from an inspection that you're in the process of closing. The second way is just to hit the New Investigation button. So you can do this and you can add the inspection in later, or you can go right from the inspection. So now let's talk about the details of this form. There's a lot of stuff you can fill out on this form, but the only thing that's required is the incident date. Because in a lot of cases, you'll get a phone call and you'll want to enter this record and generate a case number and things like that, but you don't know anything yet. You're only just starting the investigation. So we'll say the incident was May 1st, and I don't need to fill anything else out on the screen. The things I can fill out if I know them are the incident time, the incident county. Why am I in Mendocino?
It's a lovely place.
That's interesting. I'm going to quickly log out and log back in as San Diego. What county you're 20...
37.
37. I don't know why I was in Mendocino.
Lovely place, nice vineyards.
Much better. Okay, so new investigation. So I'll put in the date. I can enter a time if I know it. I can skip that. The incident county. Most of the time you're investigating your own incident. Sometimes counties are short-staffed and they'll have an adjacent county investigate an incident for them. Pretty unlikely in San Diego County, but some of the northern counties you will see it. Location is just a description field. So this could be a street address. It could be a permit number and site number, whatever information you know about the location. And then below that, there's three really important areas for reporting purposes. The first is the investigation type. So if you're familiar with the the PIR report, Peering F-127 form, that requires you to classify things as human effects, environmental, property loss, damage, and then under human effects, these different subcategories. And then we have two additional types that you can identify in CalPEATS. One is other special incidents. These can be investigations that warrant your time and may warrant enforcement response activity, but they don't fall into the human effects, property damage, environmental categories for DPR, or they don't meet the definition of a pesticide incident for reporting purposes. Most commonly what we see on here are like neighbor odor complaints and things like that. And the last one is a special category that we added called inspection consolidation, and that's why I mentioned a few minutes ago that anytime you have two inspections that are linked, like a field worker and then a headquarters for the pesticide use reports, If you're going to combine those two into one enforcement response, you have to create this investigation that will link those two inspections together for the purpose of going to enforcement. That's step 2 in that trail of clues. The third step is, why do you have to do that? And we'll talk about that when we look at the enforcement response record in CalPEATS. Okay, now there's a note here that says you don't have to specify this up front. Most of the time, this is the piece of information you don't know. You don't know what this is going to turn into. So you can leave it blank. Just be aware that before you close this investigation, you're going to have to specify the type. If it's a complaint investigation, we want you to identify the complaint type. And this complaint type is a list that you maintain in your county. So this isn't a DPR predetermined list. So this is for your reporting purposes. And what's happened in the past a lot is commissioners have been asked, tell us about how you're responding to complaints. And it's good if you have things categorized this way, particularly for things like if it's a bee kill complaint or if it's an overspray complaint, different things that become hot button items. You can classify things and then look up your investigation activity.
So is that to say that we can set those categories?
What's that?
Is that to say that we can set the categories
Yeah.
on that list?
Yeah, you have an administrative screen where you can set up what these complaint type categories are.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's an important one if you can identify it and if it is a complaint investigation, but it's for your own purposes. So I say it's important, but it's only as important as you find it useful. Another one that is becoming more and more important is once you do an investigation or as you're doing an investigation, you're going to find all kinds of things about it. Right? It may involve groundwater, it may involve surface water, it may involve bee kills, it may involve overspray, it may involve farm labor camps, all these different hot topic items. And so we've added the ability to add characteristics. And this is not a single selection. I can say this has to do with ag-urban interface and pesticide residue. So I can add as many characteristics, and that allows you through the advanced query tool to then say, well, show me all the investigations that involved groundwater or involved, bee kill or whatever. Again, the list of things that show up here is you can manage. You have your own list that you can develop here. But to the extent that your investigators can fill out this data now or before they close the investigation, that will assist in your ability to answer questions about your activity related to those things. In the past, every time someone has a question about something, DPR would add a category to the Kramer, and then you'd have to do some more tracking, and it was a pain. At least from the investigation standpoint, you can identify how many incidents you investigated that involved certain topics this way. Okay, more commonly, like I said, when you first start the investigation, all you know is the date and the fact that it's in your county. So that's all I'm going to fill out, and I'm going to say create investigation. The last checkbox on the screen there that I didn't mention is the priority flag. What was this telling me? It's complaining at me.
You have to specify a type. If it's a bug, I already informed it.
Well, specifically you don't. So let me just refresh my screen. Weird validation problem there. If this is a priority investigation, again, you usually don't know that until you're actually into it investigating it, but you know the criteria for identifying something as priority. Well, this wants an investigation type. That's interesting. So this is our investigation form. And before I launch into a discussion of all the things that are on here, because it's a pretty dense form, particularly compared to some of the inspection forms, I just want to note there's a couple of different ways that counties use this form. Some counties open the investigation record in CalPEATS as soon as the incident is known. And as they do their investigation work, they keep filling in bits. And they use this form to help them determine when they feel like they have enough evidence to close the investigation and move on to enforcement, or close it and not move on to enforcement. Other counties do their entire investigation and wait till it's finished, and then they come back in here and they open the investigation record and fill it out. I have no preference. DPR has no preference. It's totally how it works best for your county. The thing that you're missing if you come in at the end and fill everything out is metrics on timing, how long an investigation was open for. As you know, in the inspections part of CalPEATS is an activity log that tells you when it was started, when it transitioned into various statuses. So that's totally up to you and makes no difference to us, but that's just a note on how people are using the form. Just like the inspection forms, down the right-hand side, you have your little quick menu that takes you to all of these information blocks. So I'll just talk about the information blocks in general, and then we'll talk about sort of the process of filling them out. In the investigation detail, we have various things that are reported on the PEIR report. So, I don't want to talk about every field individually, but some of the important ones: number of affected parties, whether it's a priority investigation, yes or no. If it's a priority investigation, what's the priority investigation number, which you'll get assigned. Who the investigator is. By default, it's me, but in the event you have somebody entering your investigation data for you, they can assign it to whoever the investigator is. Open due date. For priority investigations, we have a countdown that applies to priority investigations. And then we have a different countdown that applies to non-priority investigations. So when we go back to the dashboard and we look at this, I'll talk to you about that countdown indicator. But with priority investigations, if you want to extend that countdown, there's a form you fill out to send to DPR. Now I think you just give them a call. And if they approve an extended due date on it, then you can enter an extended due date for it, which will reset that countdown to that date. And then down at the bottom, there's a section for people notified. So there's different agencies that get notified on certain investigation types. Again, most of this is, all of this is stuff that's on the PEIR form, and there's instructions on how to fill it out. So I may know some of the answers. I'm certainly not an expert on the details of the investigation data. But anyone who does investigation should hopefully recognize most of these things. Okay. The next section is narrative and location. And here you'll see a note on the screen that says, don't include any HIPAA protected information. So let's talk about HIPAA for a minute. Whenever you're doing an investigation, it's likely, if it's involves human exposure, that there's going to be HIPAA protected information in this investigation. So how do we deal with that in CalPEATS? Well, the first thing to note is with inspections, you can do an inspection, and if you're out of the office, you can call up one of your coworkers and say, hey, can you go fill out this thing on my inspection and submit it for me? And they can do that. Any inspector can log in and grab anybody else's inspection and fill out the data and submit it. Not so with investigations. With investigations, the only people that can open an investigation record while it's in progress are the investigator and the investigator's supervisor. If you are not the investigator or the investigator supervisor, then you're not going to be able to open this investigation. Even when the investigation is closed, in CalPEATS, normally once a record is closed, it's available to everybody to review, including other counties. Once the investigation is closed, there's certain portions of the investigation that are marked as HIPAA protected. And you'll be able to view everything on here except the claimant section. Okay, so all the HIPAA protected information is buried under these claimant records. And as a non-HIPAA privileged user, i.e. you're not the investigator and you're not the supervisor of the investigator, all you'll see is a name and a WHS case number if they, are a WHS incident. Okay, so that's why there's a note here. Under the narrative, don't talk about individual people and any medical issues or symptoms or anything else that may be HIPAA protected, because everyone in your county can see this, and once it's closed, everyone everywhere can see this, and so it must not contain HIPAA protected information. And then on the location, that's just like I said, a narrative description of the location, as much detail as you can provide. So then there's a section for respondents and for claimants. And respondents, this is very much like adding people to an inspection. So I'll click on Add New Respondent, and then I get my familiar search. So I could say this was something to do with Adobe Hill Farms. And we have a slightly more detailed form for the respondents, right? So if you're just one of the inspected parties on an inspection, we identify who you are, you can update their license information, and that's about it. Here you need to identify what's their role in this investigation. In this case, Adobe Hill Farms was a grower. Permit number we've pulled in because we selected their permit record. And then address information. And then if they are a individual licensee, then if you have it, we want the employer information. So a lot of cases, this might be a field rep or a applicator on a structural, and we want to know who they're working for at the time. The rule here is that an investigation can only have one respondent. So let me close this. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. The rule here is when you do an investigation, if you're going to assign violations here, each violation is going to have to be ascribed to a particular respondent. Right? So within inspections, you identify all the parties involved and you identify all the non-compliances, but you don't necessarily say who's responsible for which non-compliances. If we're going to move forward to enforcement response from this investigation, at some point, if I identify Adobe Hill Farms and then I also identify, a private applicator or a QAL, here's a QAC. So now I've got two respondents on here. I'm going to need to, at some point, decide who's responsible for which violations. So keep in mind when you're doing investigations, in the beginning of the investigation, you might identify a whole laundry list of people who were involved. But at some point, you're going to need to narrow that list down to just the people who are responsible for the violations. Okay, and then the claimant section obviously is for everyone who may have been affected by this incident. So this could be field workers, this could be neighbors, property owners, it could be the grower if this is an investigation into a misapplication incident. So there's three ways to add claimants. And this gets back to the other two ways that I told you exist, but I haven't shown you yet as to how to start an investigation. So if you recall, I said you can start an investigation from an inspection. You can start it just out of thin air. It can be requested from Worker Health and Safety, or it can come in as a publicly reported incident report. So if I am doing an investigation and then I get a call from Worker Health and Safety that says, oh, we've had this incident, I want you to investigate it, and you realize you're already investigating it, well now, instead of deleting your investigation and re-entering all that data, you want to just add the Worker Health and Safety individuals from Worker Health and Safety into your investigation. So that's what this button for is add new Work Health and Safety case. I'm going to not talk any more about that because later we'll go and look at what a Work Health and Safety investigation looks like. Just be aware that if you're already investigating an incident and then you get a request from Work Health and Safety to investigate it, you don't have to cancel and start over. You can add their individuals into your investigation.
Is there a limitation on how many claimants you can add?
Unlimited. Any number of claimants on an incident. And what often happens is Work Health and Safety will get a report from 3 people, and you'll be out doing the investigation. You'll find 2 other people that Work Health and Safety doesn't know about. you can add those people in. So you can have a mix of work health and safety case numbers and other individuals in your investigation. So then the fourth way I said you can start an investigation is you get an incident report that comes in from someone through the CalPEATS mobile phone app. Well, again, you may see an incident come in from CalPEATS and you may say, oh, I've already started investigating that. So how do I connect that incident report into my investigation so that once I close my investigation, the system will report that complaint as having been dealt with? And that's where you click this Add Incident Report, and that will bring in the reporter of that incident into your investigation as another claimant. So 3 different ways to add claimants in. Most of the time when you're doing your own investigation, you're just going to use this left one. These other 2 are for your convenience in case, as is often the case, you've already started looking into something by the time you get notice from some other source and you want to combine that data into one investigation. Okay, our next section is for violations. So as you go through and you are doing your investigation, you're going to discover certain violations or not. There's 2 ways to add violations. The most commonly used one in this instance will be add new violations. So that is just a code section search. 62, 70, 62, 66, 27, that's what I'm looking for. So this would be monthly summary pesticide use reports not submitted. I can go look by name, so I could look at labeling violations. If you've used the feature in the inspections mobile app where you can add a code section on the fly, this is exactly the same widget. So it lets you search for a code section. When you click on it, you can click on the view button to read the full text of it. And once you determine that is the code section that was violated, you can click the add button, and that will add a violation of that code section into your investigation. Okay? So if you're just investigating an incident that's not related to anything else, this is the way you would introduce those violations. Now that I have this investigation going on, if I do a quick sidebar and I go look back at my dashboard, down in my violations section, I don't see it here, but I probably have to go search for it. I will see that violation listed on my dashboard. Because it exists, it's been noted in the system, and it hasn't been brought into an enforcement response. I'm not going to see that until I close the investigation. And obviously, while you're doing the investigation, you may add violations, remove them, adjust them, change the code section on them. So we're not going to list them on the dashboard until I actually close the investigation. But that ties back to that cradle to grave tracking chart. This is one of the ways that you introduce new violations. Now, if I had associated this investigation with an inspection, which I haven't, that's the next section down, is a list of the inspections that are associated with this investigation. I can click Add Violation from Inspection, and that would go to all the code section violations on the inspection, and I could pick from those to add into the investigation. So let me come back to that button, and down here I'm going to say, oops, I meant to start this investigation from an inspection, or I'm in the middle of the investigation and I ask one of my inspectors to go out and do an inspection, and they come back and they say, here's my inspection that I've completed. So I can either click New Inspection and enter the inspection details, or I can say Add Existing, and that will give me a list of all of the closed inspections in the county that I can then bring into this investigation. So, normally I'd filter down to inspection number here, but I'll just grab this one. So, okay, let's associate this inspection with this investigation. And so that does a couple of things. One, it shows me in my investigation record that this inspection is part of the relevant case documentation. And the second is it enables this add violation from inspection. So there are 2 violations on this inspection. And if I click add violation, it will tell me here are the 2 violations that were on the inspection, and I can add those into my investigation. Normally, when you start an investigation from an inspection, it automatically brings all the violations in. If you add the inspection later, then you can choose which of those violations you want to bring in. Okay, so that's how you identify the violations and the inspections associated with this investigation. Like I say, many investigations don't have any inspections on them, so that's only if that's a relevant piece of it. Identifying products. Again, this fills out part of the PEIR report for you. We don't right now have any other reporting that happens from in terms of the investigation reporting, but the AQT will let you search for investigations that included certain products. This is very similar to adding a product to an inspection, where you can search for the product by name or by registration number. Once you add the product, we ask you for a little bit more information about it. On the inspections, we require some information here. On investigations, everything's pretty open. There's very little information that's required during the investigation. So you would have a treatment date. The commodity is, I'm leave that blank because that was, this would be like for a structural. And then, whatever information I can fill out here. And as always with everything in CalPEATS, there's always an attachments box at the bottom where you can attach pictures or scans or what have you. Okay, next thing below products is notifications. This is on priority investigations, there's certain notifications you have to make. And on other investigations, there are notifications that you choose to make to different agencies. I won't say any more about that. I don't know if you do that here. Some of the northern counties, they notify BLM of certain things. They notify Fish and Wildlife of certain things. So it's just a place to record any other agencies that you've notified about this investigation. Who is the agency, who was the person notified, and what notification date was. And if you sent them a letter rather than just a phone call, you can attach a copy of the letter or anything else that you sent to them.
And so there's no internal mechanism to actually send the notice through CalPEATS. It's
No.
just us recording that we did it.
Yep, this is very informal, and it is only, to my knowledge, used by a few counties. So we just left it as just a record of the fact that the notification happened. Below notifications is attachments, so this can be heavily used to attach whatever kinds of documents, videos, audio, pictures, Word files, Excel files, anything else that's relevant to the case. There are a couple of special attachments on here. One is anything that is related to a medical report about an individual. Again, don't put that here. Keep in mind that HIPAA-protected information must go under the claimant. And I haven't gone into the Claimant Form yet. I'm saving that one for last because it's the most detailed, most complex. But if I get a doctor's report for Joe, put it under Joe's record, not in the general attachments box. However, if you do attach something here, I'll just attach a text file. Under details, you can flag it as HIPAA protected. So while we prefer you don't put attachments in that area, if you need to, because you get a single report that covers 20 different people and you don't feel like breaking it up into individual segments, you can flag it as HIPAA protected. And then there's two other flags. There's a confidential flag, which generally is used for confidential business information or confidential product information. And then there's a flag for, is it the final investigation report? When I'm done with this, I'm going to print that PEIR, I'm going to sign it, and I'm going to scan a copy and I'm going to attach it to this record because I want to be nice to DPR so that they can quickly go look it up when they want to see it. Yep.
So the HIPAA protected and the confidential, those radio buttons, how do those restrict access to users?
I will show you that in just a minute. The confidential is just a flag.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't affect anything. HIPAA will exclude this attachment when you export this record. and it will not allow you to see that attachment if you are not a HIPAA privileged individual.
And those are assigned by the county?
No, that's the investigator and the investigator's supervisor,
Okay.
and anyone who's a full-on admin in the county, because they have access to everything.
Yeah.
So anyway, we use the final investigation report to flag that final copy of the PEIR for DPR's convenience, so they can easily, or anyone else who wants to quickly scan through the 400 photos that were attached and just pick out that final report. Okay, next we have a section on forms. One of the enhancements that we made fairly recently, last year sometime, to the program is initially we didn't require any information to be entered, and we didn't generate the 127 form. That was a design decision that was made before we even came on board. So we finally got that reversed, and now you can you can generate a partially filled PEIR report from CalPEATS. For the most part, that report should be pretty complete, but we keep it as a fillable PDF so that you can make edits and whatnot to it. The idea is you'll do any polishing that you need to do on it and then print it out, sign it, and scan it and upload it. However, there's a bunch of other forms that are related to the investigation that we don't generate automatically, right? So, for example, a clothing release form. If you go and take field workers' clothing and you need them to sign a clothing release form, there are others. Pesticide analysis report if you send pesticide in for lab analysis. So what we do here is if you add one of these forms to your investigation, we give you the PDF, and if there's information on here that we can fill out, we fill it out. You'll see these are all fillable PDFs. This one doesn't happen to have any information on it that we can fill out from the investigation data, but let's see what's one that would be, like a clothing release form maybe. I haven't looked at these forms in quite a while. Yep, nothing on here either. So this is kind of a convenient place to find those forms if you don't have them. It's not all that useful because for the most part these forms, if you're out in the field, you're going to have paper copies of them. But if you want to attach those forms, you can. I know there's got to be one on here that I have some data in. Anyway, you can generate them from here. You can print them out, or you can fill them in online. You can, do whatever you need to do with them. Once they are filled out, if you choose, you can then reattach that form up in the attachments area. And if you do that, then you should go ahead and delete it from here. So I'll just leave it at that. It is the least used part of the investigation module, and I honestly know that it's all that useful at this point. And then last thing on here is the activity log. So you'll see we have our investigation created. It will note in there anytime I update the status of an investigation. I believe it notes things like adding work health and safety cases and incident reports and different activities that happen during the course of the investigation. And then, of course, I can add my own activity log entries. So if I just wanted to keep my own personal record of what happened in here, I can do that. So let's round back up to our Claimants Form. So most of the information we just looked at is pretty general level information, descriptions, attachments, that type of thing. Then the real details are under this Claimant Form. So let's look at the information that we collect about each claimant. So we have a claimant name. If this claimant had been transmitted to you from Worker Health and Safety, it would have a WHS case number. If you add a WHS case to your investigation, it will have a WHS case number. But that's an important thing to know is if you see a WHS case number here, that means that this is also being tracked, not the incident, but that individual is being tracked in the Work Health and Safety portion of CalPEATS. And then we have several tabs of information. We have information about the claimant, environmental property damage, medical information, and dermatitis information. Those are all the components of the PEIR report about each claimant. So under here, we have claimant type, they're a claimant or they're injured party or they're a property owner. And I'm not going to fill out all this information. What you'll find is we're in the test system right now. We are right in the process of adding some data requirements to these forms. DPR has noticed over the last year that a lot of the PEIR forms are missing information. And so they've asked us to make it required in CalPEATS to try and help people to remember to fill it in. So if I go through here and I have to keep going back to fill in things that are required, that's because it's a brand new feature and I'm not that familiar with it yet. So Joe is 35. I'm not going to put in phone or email. Yes, he had dermatitis symptoms. I would fill in the address, gender. Did he sign the interview? And did he go see the doctor? And then who is Joe's employer? And then what PPE was used. So we can fill in some PPE items. And then if I have attachments, if I have a written statement or if I have photographs or anything like that, I would attach that here. And again, remember, everything on this form is considered HIPAA protected. So if you have pictures of, rashes and things like that that are HIPAA protected, this is where you can add those. So I have to put in address, city, state, zip, and whether they signed their interview form. Okay.
Are all complainant sections or like this HIPAA protected or just in here?
Sorry, Carol, what was that? I'm really hard of hearing. So.
I'm sorry. Is the claimant information, is it always HIPAA protected?
Yes. We make the assumption that it's HIPAA protected, even if there's nothing in there that's HIPAA protected. We can't really tell if something you've written contains things
Well,
that
that
should
also
be.
protects their PII then.
Hmm?
It also protects their PII.
Right, yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah. Sign yes, save and back. Okay, so under our claimants, we now have Joe Smith, and like I said, the tile that shows Joe is very limited in information. There's not going to be a lot of info there. It just as a warning, hopefully you don't get many incidents that have lots and lots of people, but this section can get pretty long when you have 40, 50 people affected by something. Okay, adding a new work health and safety case. I'm not going to see any listed here. If work health and safety had referred a case to San Diego County, and it had not been brought into an investigation, I would see that case listed here, and I could click add. Unfortunately, you don't get a lot of information from work health and safety. All you get is a name and a work health and safety case number. So once I add selected, you'll see that tile appear with the claimant name and the WHS case number. You'll then need to click on that tile and fill out the claimant information for that individual. And adding an incident report, again, requires that we have some incident reports that have been submitted, which we don't. But that would then add the submitter of that incident report in as a claimant. Just be aware that a lot of those are submitted anonymously, so the claimant name may be anonymous. Okay, so
the claimant can be the complainant or it can be the injured party?
yeah, either the complainant or the injured party. So it might be a neighbor that witnessed something, or it might be a worker or somebody nearby that was sprayed. And it can also be the property owner. So it may not be someone that was even present for the incident, but it could, if a farmer is reporting a crop loss because of overspray, then the grower could be the claimant as well.
Because some of the items on the list I saw might not apply, not be applicable to it.
Yep, so the things that we've added, we do need the address information and whether they signed their interview report or statement, or however you collected their information. Okay, so let's go back to our claimant Joe and look at the other tabs that are on here. So we looked at the basic claimant information. Then environmental property damage is obviously only if this is somebody whose property was damaged or reporting environmental damage. And again, it's just the property information and what dollar value of damage was assumed or a description of the damage and the declared value. So that's fairly short. Then the medical form, again, fairly short, but talks about the symptoms that were experienced, the type of activity they were performing when they were injured, the injury extent, which is just a general category of the injuries. If they went into a doctor and were just in for observation and then released, if they were actually admitted to the hospital, and whether or not treatment was provided. And then there's a separate form for dermatitis that just talks about the dermatitis symptoms and what the symptoms were, and then what PPE they were wearing, and then other applications that they have made to try and determine, the potential cause, and then more exposure information, medical history. So, like I said, it's a pretty long form. We divided it into these 4 separate tabs. But that's really the core of the investigation report that DPR is looking for.
Just out of curiosity, why
Mm-hmm.
did not? Just out of curiosity, why did they not include the dermatitis part into the medical part? There have to be a separate tab just for dermatitis.
I don't know. DPR has always considered dermatitis as a separate class of injury
Oh.
than medical injury. Illness or, whatever.
Okay.
So I don't know why they do that, but it's called out separately on the PIR form, and they want that data collected separately. In the old form, the dermatitis report was a supplement to the 127. It was 127D or E or something. And you only filled it out if you checked dermatitis on the main claimant information form. So that's why it shows up in a separate tab here.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if a person is complaining of respiratory problems, then obviously you don't fill out the
Use the
dermatitis part,
form.
right? Yeah.
It's like,
Okay, so that's the process of filling out the investigation report. And as I said, some counties do their investigation completely offline, come back and fill this in later. But DPR does want the data for these incident reports filled in. So now that we've provided all those details on those different tabs on the claimant form, and we've added some required field validation, we now have a button at the top here to generate the PRENF 127 form. So I can generate that form. And, as you'll see it is delivered as a PDF form. So you can use whatever PDF editor if you need to make some adjustments to this form. But the idea is that once you have this form, you can generate it out of the system, print it, sign it, and upload the scanned signed copy as your final report. We didn't exactly 100% mimic the paper form as it existed before, because the paper form had room for example, for one claimant, and then you had to attach supplement pages. And in generating the report, knowing that we're going to spread onto separate pages, we just expanded that section. So you'll see a complainant section that repeats for every complainant that's in the investigation. So you'll see some minor differences between the old paper form that had these, attachments, and our form, which is an all-in-one, expanding form to cover all the information from the investigation.
So the paper form differentiates between like PIRs and AIRs. Would an antimicrobial investigation spit out basically the same form as this, the same template?
Yeah, actually, I don't want to answer that question incorrectly. As far as I know, if it's an antimicrobial incident, it is categorized as a different type of investigation. and I can't tell you what DPR is expecting as far as the form to be filled out. So that will be something that, either your EBIL can help explain, or I'll ask the question at the next TAP meeting.
Well, we can even, I'm just asking what the system will do, but that's something we can test in the
Test
test
area,
environment. Yeah.
Yeah, do you submit the 127 for AIRs?
What do we actually send to DPR?
It's a front page, so that's the front page of your investigation. They're the
Yeah.
same right now for ARs and PARs, and it's PIF.
Okay.
You're right, it's the same.
It's just different format. I think the one we use is right off DPR's website. It's just a little bit different format, but I think the information's the same.
Yep.
It's the 127 right here.
I know that we didn't program a separate form in CalPEATS for those AIRs.
It's the same form right now.
So, it's my quick time player. Yeah, so anyway, like I say, I'll have to get back to you with that. But you can also, check it out in the test area. I'm just thinking that in the investigation, there is human effects antimicrobial. That's the only spot where there's anything specific to antimicrobials in the investigation setup in CalPEATS. Okay, so I have generated my PRENF 127. I want to go to my downloads folder. Oh, something weird's going on. I'm going to take that 127 form, I'm going to sign it, I'm going to scan it back in, and I'm going to upload it back to the system. So that's where I would go to my attachments. I would upload that completed investigation form, and then that's where I would go into details, and I would mark that as my final investigation report. So then that's highlighted and displayed first for easy reference. At that point, I want to close this investigation. So just like we do with the inspections, and this is consistent throughout all the different modules of CalPEATS, is I'm going to go back to the investigation detail, and I'm going to change the status. So I mentioned that with investigations and enforcement responses, we start to trim down the workflow. So with investigations, we don't have a draft status. Although there's lots of things that other individuals will sign during the course of an investigation, it's not like an inspection where once somebody's signed the form, we require you to provide explanation if you're going to update important things like the compliance statuses. With investigations, though, we do have an in-review status, and that will put this investigation onto your supervisor's dashboard, and your supervisor will review it and then close it or kick it back into in-progress status and ask you to provide more details. What we've seen in most counties is that the people who do investigations also have the privilege to review and close investigations. So a lot of counties, the investigator just skips that and goes right into closed status. So whichever workflow suits you best. Just be aware there is an in-review status in CalPEATS. And then I'll skip the step of logging out and logging in as a supervisor. I have privilege to close this investigation myself, so I'll go ahead and close it. And when I close it, it is going to require that I have an investigation type identified, which I do. And then I can save that. And the classification of the investigation type, and then those two other fields that I mentioned that help report on complaints and investigation characteristics, they're considered really important because nobody ever goes back to an old closed investigation to fill that stuff out. You as the investigator or the person that's reviewing the investigation know that best right when you're closing it. So we just ask you to confirm that this is all correct. And then also, it doesn't include a final report, which if that is no, and this is a pesticide exposure incident report investigation, then you're missing something, then DPR is going to call you up and say, well, you're missing your final report. So that's just a quick check step, and then you can say, yes, it's complete and correct, and I will close that investigation. And if I head back to my dashboard now, I will see in my violations section this new violation that just occurred on this investigation I just closed. So this is just like with inspections. This is the first step of the violation cradle to grave tracking. I've documented my investigation. I've noted the violation. The investigation is now closed. So the violation is going to be listed on my dashboard until I initiate an enforcement response to dispose of that violation. Any questions on the investigation? Not so much how to perform an investigation, but how to document it in CalPEATS. And that's a really important difference, and this was actually part of the initial training slides I skipped over, is we kind of switch gears from the inspections module, which is very directed. Start at the top of the form, go do this, check this, with all the details there for the inspector, to more of a, hey, go do your thing and then document the results in investigations. And that's just the nature of investigations. They're much more free form. You go where the evidence leads you. And we just require that you document the results to an extent so that we satisfy the reporting requirements for DPR. But most importantly, provide the documentation for these violations in case you go to enforcement and there's a challenge. And you want to be able to make sure these violations will stand up in an appeal or in court. So the last thing I'll cover on investigations is what does it look like when you get a worker health and safety investigation? And to do that, I'm going to log out quickly and log in as a worker health and safety person. And I'm going to enter a new case. So I've got a case. And it's in San Diego. No, not Napa, San Diego. And I want San Diego to investigate it. And it occurred on the 5th. They don't use the reference number, it's not self-harm, and I'll put in some useful notes. And if I had an attachment like the doctor's first report or a complaint form or something like that, I would attach it here for you. And then I will hit save. So now I've got this, let's filter that. I've got so much data in test here.
So reference case numbers are only attached when they're
No, Work Health and Safety attaches a case number to every individual if they log into the system.
I was just mentioning something about self-harm.
Yeah, they register self-harm cases in the system, but they don't send those to counties for investigation.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, they do the investigations themselves. And then the reference number is a number that they use if they've got several individuals that are part of the same incident.
Okay.
So what they refer to you as the incident, and then when you begin an investigation for the incident, if there's 5 people attached, you'll see 5 claimants listed. So, okay, so this is the one I just entered here. And actually that would be a useful thing to illustrate. So let me put in a reference number. And I'll add another one. Okay, so I'm going to request county investigation. I've got oh, never mind. It's already assigned to the investigation county, I believe. Well, let me see how things proceed here. Hopefully, in my work health and safety investigations, I'll have a new request here. So, I skipped over describing the work health and safety process. That's their process. They do their thing. Once they've entered cases and they've assigned them to your county, those cases or the incident that involves those cases will appear on your dashboard in this section here. There's also a mechanism for sending an email to somebody in your county, and there's a place where you can configure who gets those emails. So it's not just noticing it on the dashboard, but someone can receive the email. If you don't know who needs to start this investigation, because you have things broken up by region or by type of pesticide or however you break up these investigations, you can preview any documents that were associated with this request. And that's where I said if they have a doctor's first report or a statement or a complaint form, they'll attach it, and you'll see them here and you can look at them. And then once you decide who needs to do that investigation, you'll tell that individual, hey, this WHS incident is yours. And they will log in and they'll click the start button. That actually begins the investigation into this incident. So if you recall, I said, just going back, reiterating, because that's how I do these things, you can start an investigation from an inspection, which will pull all the inspection data and all the violations from the inspection into the investigation. You can start one from scratch, which we did. You can start one from a work health and safety request, and when you do that, it's going to attach those claimants for you. So all I know is the incident date, which it pre-populated from the work health and safety request, and I'll just say create the investigation. This, you can ignore this. This is some new weird bug we have in the test area. It specifically doesn't require you to enter an investigation type. So we're back to the normal investigation form. There's no difference in the form and the data you enter for a work health and safety investigation versus a county-initiated investigation. But what you will see is down in the claimants and injured parties, you will find those two work health and safety claimants already attached to your investigation for you. Now, unfortunately, work health and safety doesn't really enter any useful data about these claimants. So all you're going to get when you open the claimant form, you don't get a name, you don't get anything. All you will get is whatever documents they attached for you. And generally they have a document of some kind attached. So you'll need to open that document, read it, and then you can begin to fill out that claimant information into the appropriate fields. So a couple of things that happen frequently with work health and safety investigations. The first is I already discussed. You'll have started an investigation and you will see, let me delete this investigation. Back to here, edit, and cancel. Delete investigation, that's what I'm looking for. So, in a lot of cases, you will go to your work health and safety requests, you'll preview the documents, you'll read the documents, and you'll see that, yeah, they showed up in hospital in San Diego, but the incident took place in Imperial County. And so what you're going to need to do is let work health and safety know, hey, you've assigned this to the wrong county. They'll withdraw this investigation request and submit a new one to Imperial County. In some cases, you'll start the investigation and only then will you realize that it's in the wrong county. What we recommend at that point is you close your investigation with no findings. Just put a note in the narrative that it's being transferred to Imperial County. and then let work health and safety know, and they'll transfer it over to Imperial County. But the other thing you'll see is you'll say preview documents, and you'll look at the document, and you'll go, oh, we're already investigating this. And so this worker health and safety case number is what you want to add in as claimants to your ongoing investigation. So if I already have an investigation going for this 5/5/22 incident, then I can go down to my claimants area and say, add a worker health and safety case. And I'm going to add these two cases in from that request. So I just took that request from worker health and safety and added it into my ongoing investigation. And when I do that, it does the same as starting a new investigation. It clears that request off of the dashboard. So you'll see under my work health and safety investigation request, it's disappeared. So long as all the individual cases that are in that request are in an ongoing investigation, that clears out that work health and safety request. Okay, let us take a look at another characteristic of an investigation. I'm actually going to go to the investigation that we just closed. So I'm going to go to Search Investigations, and I'll just look for recent ones. So this is the investigation I just closed. You'll see there's an export button here. A lot of times people will say, give me everything you have on the investigation. And it's very hard to export an investigation as a report because a lot of the important stuff are attachments. So instead of exporting a report, we generate a report and then we put that in a zip file along with all the attachments. And this is where you can filter out the HIPAA protected information and the confidential attachments. So by default, they're excluded whenever you do an export. So in this case, I would see in the report, I'll see the names of the claimants, and I'll have copies of all the attachments that are at the investigation level, but I won't have any of the claimant details, and I won't have any of the claimant attachments. If I know I'm sending this through secure mail to a recipient that should receive that information, I can check this to include the HIPAA protected information. That will then include the details of each claimant, and in the folder that contains all the attachments for each claimant, there'll be a subfolder with their attachments in it. And ditto for the confidential attachments. So let's just take a look at, let me actually add some attachments here. So I have these two attachments, and then I'll go into Joe, and I will add an attachment for Joe. I can't because this is a closed investigation. Well, you'll see what the process looks like. So let's include these, and I'll generate that export. And as I said, it generates a zip file. And if I look in there, there's a PDF form that just has, just a tabular export of all the data that was in that investigation. So you scroll through all that, but then in addition, there's a folder that is called Attachments, and in here I'll find that final report that I attached, and then if I had attachments for each claimant, there would be a claimant folder for each claimant, and then under there would be the HIPAA protected attachments for them. So it's a pretty useful export. It's got all the data plus all the attachments. What this is sometimes used for is if you're halfway through an investigation and you realize it needs to transfer to another county and you want to send them all the stuff, you can run the export, include all the confidential and the HIPAA information, encrypt it on a thumb drive, send it via secure mail, or hand deliver it, and then they can bring all that information into their investigation. To me, I would still recommend you don't delete the investigation from your system because you spent time on it. And eventually, when you all start using CalPEATS, our new timekeeping system, you'll be able to enter your time on the investigation too. So it's useful to have a record that you did that investigation work. Okay, and then last thing I want to illustrate is,
So if we had a PRA request for this report,
Mhm.
we would have to print it off as a PDF, redact all the information, and then,
yep, there's no utility that we have to redact.
well, it's a very specific,
report?
yeah,
No.
there's no way you could streamline that.
If you run the export and you don't check those two boxes, so you exclude HIPAA and you exclude confidential information, it gives you a good starting point.
Right.
Now, if you do it for an investigation and you redact the PEIR and you redact any other information on there that you wouldn't release to the public, I highly recommend that you either zip all of that up or save it as a PDF and upload it to the investigation and just call it redacted report, so that the next person that gets a public request for it doesn't have to redo it.
Yeah, and we reuse the same report when we get multiple PRA requests.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, at this point, we just have no way of identifying information to be redacted, so it's still a very manual process.
I think you are always going to have a human review that, because PII
I can
could
guarantee
be-
there is no county council in the state that would approve an auto-redacting system in Cowpeats.
No.
So, yeah, we've had that discussion before.
Yeah, but in theory, with the flags on there, automatically excluding HIPAA and confidential information,
Right.
we should only have to redact the actual written narrative at that point, right?
Not necessarily, it depends on what information is included in the report. Because the attachments could include a branch 2 service document for the,
Yeah.
Yeah.
whatever pesticide he selected that I can't remember now, that includes their name and their address.
Yep. Yep, there's always going to be a redaction step. Okay, so I want to have a quick look at our user list. And I'm just going to do a quick reset password on SD01. So I'm going to log out of my account and I'm going to log in as SD01. Because I want to illustrate what I said about, even within the county, HIPAA protected information is redacted. So this is the investigation that we just completed and closed. And I am not the investigator, and I am not the investigator's supervisor. And when I go to view this investigation, I can see that Joe Smith exists, but I can't click on Joe Smith to get the details. So basically, everything under the claimant form is protected from people who are not supposed to see any HIPAA-protected information. So again, just to reiterate that, everything that may be PII/HIPAA protected, keep it under those claimant forms. You'll also notice if I go down to attachments, that notes.txt, which I flagged as HIPAA protected, I don't even know that attachment exists as a non-HIPAA privileged person.